Do you guys ever feel like you have two selves, your work self and then your real self? Or worse, do you feel like your work self has taken the place of your real self? If so, then you probably loved the first season of Severance. Or you tried to watch it and it gave you panic attacks and you stopped. Now, in the show's dystopian present, employees at the mysterious corporation Lumon choose to undergo a surgery that splits their brain into a work self, what they call the innie, and a life self, the outie, who share zero memories.
You know, you can't just separate yourself.
Oh, no, but you can, Alexa. With this exciting new procedure.
Now, I honestly can relate to the feeling of becoming a different person when I'm at work, and I sometimes wonder if facilitating that on-the-job persona risks compromising who I really am. Critics were quick to note the show's Marxist themes, namely workers becoming increasingly estranged from the products of their labor. It's similar to what you might see in Marx's Paris manuscripts. But we think that the show might reflect something deeper and more insidious than the stuff that Marx could have imagined from the vantage point of 19th century Europe.
I can sense that the questions made you feel afraid or disoriented. Well, the good news is you're at an orientation.
Okay, so waking up on a coffin-shaped conference table like the newly dubbed Heli R isn't the chillest way to start a new job.
You see, you have been hired to a position on the severed floor of Lumon Industries.
Especially if you possess zero memories. That amnesia is essential to keeping this workplace humming, explains why everything in this office feels sort of off. You know, the halls are empty. The conversation is forced.
Nice office.
Ugh, it's horrid.
Yeah, the old one was better.
The shadowy board of directors is represented by a silent intercom speaker.
The board will be joining us remotely today.
Accolades from your boss feel lukewarm at best.
Oh, a handshake is available upon request.
And your everyday workplace directives are all pretty strange.
Post-it notes are not to be put on faces. They clog your Audi's pores.
In other words, Lumon is like your typical office environment if the emotional thermostat was 10 degrees colder. You know, it embodies the C. Wright Mills quote about modern bureaucracy. Men are estranged from one another as each secretly seeks to make an instrument of the other. The board makes an instrument of floor manager Harmony Cavell. Cavell makes an instrument of senior macro data refiner Mark, and Mark is attempting, unsuccessfully, to make an instrument of Heli. Now, in this way, Mills believed, bureaucratization was a central tenet of modern worker alienation. The workplace alienation extends to the incomprehensible labor the employees are performing.
My job is to scroll through this spreadsheet and look for numbers that are scary.
And if you've ever stared at meaningless spreadsheets or, I don't know, some sort of work memo you didn't understand, it's easy to relate to this. Similarly, expanding on Marx, Michael Yates argues that it is inherently dehumanizing to do labor in which you have little influence over either the processes or the outcome of the product. And if that's so, work at Lumon is fundamentally rooted in dehumanization because nobody in Heli's department knows what in the hell they're doing.
It's like, do we even know what we're supposedly cleaning?
Much less what the entire company does.
The true number of smiles may well be in the millions.
So what are we, like a dental company?
And rather than answer these questions and let the workers feel connected to their labor, Lumon papers over the mystery with walls of smiles and flattering pamphlets. Now, this doesn't fly for everybody, as we learn when we meet Mark's escaped former colleague and best friend, Petey, who has attempted to reintegrate the severed parts of his brain. You know, basically he wants to merge his two selves back together.
Don't you want to know what you're doing down there?
Mark may prefer blissful ignorance, especially after Petey appears to die from complications due to the reintegration. But it seems Lumon workers don't question what they're doing, much less fight back against their shitty reality, in large part because the bureaucratic environment is undergirded with violence. And that violence flows all the way down into the office banter, which is often too aggressive to be funny.
You sick? If you breathe on me, I'll rip your larynx out.
You know, some lines might even make your most obnoxious desk mate blush a little bit.
Like, I'm imagining them rounding a corner and we're all blood-soaked and I'm wearing your face and they're like, whose face is that? And I'm like, the last person who f***ed with us.
The playful brutality of these quips is reflective of the broader violence permeating Lumon, where, as Heli learns, rebellious behavior is met with intense repression. Now, this reflects what sociologist Michael Burroway argues, that the exploitable working subject can't merely be recruited at an interview. They must be actively formed through disciplinary tactics. Now, this is again literalized at Lumon, where a break room doesn't represent stale snacks and, you know, a respite from your labor, but a place where any resistance to said labor must be systematically eroded.
All I can be is sorry, and that is all I am.
The threat and regular actualization of violence also undergirds the day-to-day mechanisms that keep the Lumon apparatus humming along.
Why are you gonna make me throw my mug at you?
Why would you?
Violence shapes the very infrastructure of the office, which becomes increasingly oppressive as the season progresses.
What are we, locked in now?
I prefer the phrase safely situated.
Now, it's not just the threat of violence from the higher-ups that keeps workers in line. Management skillfully foments aggression between different departments in order to prevent solidarity amongst the severed class.
I could have.
Your new friend who lied to you about the size of his department? How do we know what else he isn't being kosher about?
What department in your work do you hate, Let us know, shout it out. We won't tell, but then after you type that out, remind yourself that you don't actually hate that department. It's been manufactured by your bosses to keep you all fighting so they can continue to exploit you to increase profit margins. They might be annoying, they might be like a bunch of dummies, but at the end of the day, class solidarity, things of that nature. Now, whether they're sharing paintings that evoke mythical violent coups amongst departments.
Look at the badges the raiders are wearing. That's not O&D, Dylan. It's us.
Or proliferating ridiculous, dehumanizing rumors about certain workers.
According to some, you each have a larval offspring.
Despite far outnumbering their overlords, the hostilities between departments make any pretense of class loyalty impossible.
You saw that painting? You want to get disemboweled today?
And when a hint of solidarity is expressed, it's deftly managed, as we see when optics and design department head Bert is retired after developing feelings for Irving.
You're all just gonna stand here and let him die?
If you haven't watched the show, there's a full-on romance between Christopher Walken and John Turturro. So if you've ever thought to yourself, you know what I'd love to see? A gay romance between Christopher Walken and John Turturro. This show's for you. Also, if you're the person who has not watched Severance and has desired for that romance to take place, that's unique and special, and I applaud you for that. Now, in this way, Lumon's control over its workers is a deft dance of estrangement, dehumanization, and the ubiquitous threat of violence. But as anyone who's ever been to like your office Christmas party knows, one, try to cap it at like 2 to 3 drinks max, because you don't want to be that guy, and you think you're not going to be that guy, and when you're that guy, you don't know you're that guy, but everyone else knows you're that guy. And then the other thing is, office politics is about more than fear and intimidation. In order to keep us participating in systems that make us miserable, corporations like Lumon have to do more than discipline us. The modern workplace has become far more complex than the one Marx wrote about, and negativity is no longer enough to keep us whistling while we work. Because when you sort numbers that are scary all day for a living, sometimes, well, you need a little fun.
You may choose one genre and one accessory.
Okay.
Now, the managers of Lumon utilize what philosopher Louis Althusser called ISAs, or ideological state apparatuses, which are basically institutions that exist to reduplicate the logic of the ruling class. Now, Althusser argued that discipline and violence weren't enough to perpetuate the ruling class's dominance. It also needed softer power, obtained through social and cultural ideals and institutions. In other words, these sorts of practices embody and perpetuate the logic of the dominant economic system.
My name is Irving, as you all know, and I've worked here for 3 years, and something about me is that I know all 9 core Lumon principles.
But you don't really notice that at the time. You just think you're having a nice day or going to school or church or work, but actually what you're doing is embodying an economic logic that perpetuates the systems of your own subjugation and oppression. Ain't life neat? Now, Lumon has its own mythology, which workers are encouraged to treat like their religion. And as Irving makes evident, no ritualization is more important than the pseudo-religious devotion to the company's first CEO, Keir Egan.
I love seeing the sunrise on his face. You know, he used to drink 3 raw eggs and milk each morning.
Egan and his whole family dynasty are treated as godly, displayed for lowly workers to admire in the so-called perpetuity wing.
It's the living soul of Lumon, and everything she stands for.
Indeed, the Egan family's written and spoken words take on biblical importance.
Should you tame the tempers as I did mine, then the world shall become but your appendage.
your employer may or may not have its own de facto Bible. But at least here in America, as author Derek Thompson argues, the religion of workism has tens of millions of people seeking transcendence at the office. But it's clear that for Irving, Lumon's pseudo-religious lore has been essential to providing him with purpose and compelling him to do his job.
But waking up on that table, I was shapeless. But then, I learned that I work for a company that has been actively caring for mankind since 1866.
And maintaining the sanctity of this lore is so important that all other literature is banned. We see just how powerful this policy has been when the inane self-help book written by Mark's brother-in-law is smuggled in.
Mark! It's an emergency.
Okay, all right.
I was going to get Mr. Milchek, but I thought it best not to break the chain of command.
Now, despite being full of cliches and nonsense, the book awakens the workers' minds by providing something, like anything, outside the words sanctioned by Lumon.
Bullies are nothing but bull and lies. At the center of industry is dust.
If you had only read old stories about Keir and his wife meeting at an ether factory and falling in love over the spirit of industry, maybe you too would fall for Ricken's psychobabble.
Your book, it opened up the world for me.
Mark, are you okay?
Yes. This book changed my whole life.
But Lumon's managers have more on their plate than just manufacturing an entire religion. Now, for the less spiritually reverent amongst their cohorts, they've concocted other aspects of corporate culture to incite the workhorse impulse.
I've earned 4 of the 5-tier incentives, including the erasers and the finger traps that you see displayed here.
Now for Dylan, a company culture of incentives keeps him hard at work in pursuit of that ever-elusive waffle party. This reflects what Althusser theorized. Ideology has a material existence that manifests in the function of apparatuses that perpetuate rituals and customs, But I guess we can ask here, what is the underlying ideology being served by this culture?
What is it we actually do here?
We serve here, you child!
Now, we don't really get a straight answer, at least from season 1, and I think this is where season 2 is going to be really important, because they could either give us something really juicy that's retroactively going to make season 1 seem even better, or they're going to totally biff it and ruin it all. So I can't wait to find out. Now, as far as we know, Lumon, they could be fixing teeth, they could be cleaning the ocean, they could be harvesting organs and selling them to weird boys on Reddit who want extra organs. But the sort of ambiguity here feels entirely intentional. Because by making Lumon so mysterious, the show is underscoring the fundamental meaninglessness of both corporate ideology and the meaninglessness of most modern companies. I don't know, I regularly hear about a company that I know is worth billions of dollars, but I have no idea what they do. You ever meet someone who's really rich and you're like, what do you do? And they're like, oh, consulting. Okay, doesn't seem like a real job, but people do it and they make a lot of money doing it. I have learned later in life that mostly what consultants do is go to places and they say, fire all the pores and you can make more money, and then they fire all the pores. And that's what they do, and they get paid a ton for that. The fact that its missives could be applied to any possible industry isn't proof of their truthfulness, or even their flexibility. It's proof of their hollowness. But hollow as they may be, the caricatures and toys and waffle parties that keep Lumon workers incentivized are important because they function as material confirmation of success. And when you're Dylan, an innie without any life outside of the company who functionally has no idea what he really does for a living, well, that makes for a shrewd motivation. And there's something tragically ironic about someone celebrating a job well done when the job itself is entirely mysterious. But even if you're not an innie, corporate perks can be totally seductive. Before I worked here, I worked for, I'll be honest, a kind of sketchy startup, but I was really distracted from the sketchiness by the fact that we had like kombucha and beer in the fridge, and we got to order our lunch every day, and on Tuesdays we had dinner night with a higher budget for that, and there was a beanbag room, and it made me not really think about work or what I was doing, What was that job? Just kidding, it was an educational startup. Of course, the good cop side of Lumon doesn't rely solely on finger toys and portraits. For its most troubled employees, the company offers psychological guidance, which includes imagining your Audi's much doper and more fulfilling life outside of Lumon's campus.
Your Audi is a friend to children and to the elderly and the insane.
And this all speaks to a real-world phenomenon identified by religious studies scholar Carolyn Chen. Her book, Work, Pray, Code, discusses what she terms the spiritual turn in management that's taken place in the tech sector, wherein work is expected to provide the comfort and purpose once supplied by organized religion. She notes that meaning is the new money, as folks look to work for something deeper than a paycheck. They want confirmation that their lives matter. This makes it especially fitting that the show never discusses salaries or raises or really anything of material concern beyond waffles, because the job truly isn't about the paycheck. That's how I feel. I get my paycheck sent to me and I throw it in the trash and I say, I do it for the love of the game, dog. I definitely don't do that. It's just about money. We gotta survive. We gotta survive somehow, so what are you gonna do? For Irving, the idea that his labor is sustaining the life of a kind, charitable Audi is enough to keep that black goo from dripping down on his desk. Still, the most effective rituals at Lumon tend to involve group participation. These rituals have been instituted to encourage a sense of solidarity that sustains workers through their daily drudgery. But there's a darker side to this. Scholar Kathy Weeks argues that professional socialization has always served as a disciplinary mechanism. That's because socializing requires identifying with those around you and monitoring yourself to fit in amongst them. Now, in this way, a party isn't just a party, right? It's further inculcation into how to exist at Lumon. Of course, management is smart enough to render it impossible for the employees to interact outside of the office.
You'll leave at 5. Well, actually, they stagger our exit, so 5:15.
Now, what this means is the social interaction inside Lumon is fundamentally inauthentic. In fact, that's true of all the emotional comforts offered by Lumon. They exist solely to cement the company's power over its employees, but that doesn't really explain why it's so effective. Now, the mandatory cheer and unshakable compliance that Lumon's management demands is reflective of the modern corporate work environment at large. It's no longer merely enough to fulfill your job description. Rather, as Italian philosopher Maurizio Lazzarato puts it, the real goal of the modern workplace is for the worker's soul to become part of the factory. The fact that the innies never so much as leave the office merely literalizes this phenomenon.
No workplace shall be repurposed for slumber.
Their occupation might be the vague task of macro data refinement, but a huge part of their job is posing for photos, convincing management they're happy, and living out the vague values espoused by the Eegans. If you have a job title that sounds completely made up, let us know in the comments, and we can just all vote and see who has the most made-up sounding job title. Now, this fits what Lazzarato says about modern work, which he says can be defined as the capacity to activate and manage productive cooperation. It's not just about doing your job, it's about doing it with a smile and a compliment for your manager. Mike, you look great today. John, I love that jacket on you. This kind of performance is just one aspect of the self-surveillance innate to the modern workplace, where, as Weeks writes, employees are more often expected to adopt the perspectives of managers rather than simply yield to their authority.
I do think the old photos are supposed to stay on the desk until the new ones come in.
The worker's dedication to the rules and to ensuring that others follow them can border on deranged.
Shouldn't there be labels on the soap dispensers saying soap?
It's sort of like you become a snitch on both yourself and others, again, in a way that just serves your manager more than you. And while Lumon has created the pretext of total surveillance, it becomes increasingly unclear to what extent people are actually being watched.
Who's to say there are security guards? I've only ever seen Grainer.
Or maybe it's enough that we think we're constantly being watched.
But as philosopher Byung-Chul Han points out about modern labor culture, whether or not there is security is beyond the point. He writes, this labor camp is defined by the fact that one is simultaneously prisoner and guard, victim and perpetrator. One exploits oneself. It means that exploitation is possible even without domination.
The surest way to tame a prisoner is to let him believe he's free.
So management's greatest success is in convincing the workers to surveil themselves and one another.
I just wonder if it might be helpful for us to stand behind her and perhaps chant her name.
In this single-minded devotion, Lazzarato notes, it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish leisure time from work time. In a sense, life becomes inseparable from work. When I really feel this? If I'm reading something or watching a movie or a TV show that's supposed to be just for me, it's supposed to be Michael time, and then I think, oh, we could do a work thing on this. And I take out my notes app and I'm like, oh, we could do a video and blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, damn, a thing that was just about me has now become about potentially creating content that could fuel an algorithm and get Google AdSense money. It's just want to move to the woods. If anyone has a cabin that no one lives in, let me know. I'd like to move to the woods. For innies who black out the moment they leave the office, this is yet another real phenomenon vividly literalized by the show's conceit. What's more, in crafting the workplace as pseudo-religious, Lumon ensures that failure to abide by its missives, in other words, to commit a sin, is inherently guilt-inducing, as Irving quickly learns during his brief romance with Bert.
It does discourage romantic fraternization.
By creating semi-religious stakes, Lumon extracts complete fidelity from its employees. At the same time, workers are told that they are responsible for their conditions. They all apparently freely agreed to be severed.
I have, of my own free accord, elected to undergo the procedure colloquially known as severance.
And this feels like a really apt metaphor for work, right? Because, we've all freely chosen our jobs, but is it really totally free when the pressure of paying for rent, food, student loans, a bunch of other stuff render that freedom somewhat illusory? And while all of the severed employees are enacting this type of auto-exploitation, this idea is best embodied in the season finale, spoilers, when Helly realizes that not only did her Audi freely choose severance, but she chose it in order to make a political point and to encourage millions of others to do the same.
But I took a severed job because it sounds freaking awesome.
Helly realizes she's not only been the architect of her own oppression, but of the potential oppression of the masses. Fittingly, her immediate wave of guilt is expressed via the words burned into her brain in the break room.
I can be sorry. And that is all I am.
Even Lumon's most rebellious employee can't escape the effectiveness of the company's multi-pronged mind control efforts. So are we all Hellies, creating the conditions of our own exploitation, even as it makes us not want to be around anymore?
I don't want to be around anymore.
Or are we Marks, despairingly accepting our own workplace alienation because there doesn't really seem to be an alternative? Or are we Irvings, desperately searching for deep spiritual meaning at our 9-to-5 as a means of escaping our despair and also wanting to do it with Christopher Walken? Or are we Dylans, so focused on winning the game of work that the allure of waffles has blinded us to the conditions of our own exploitation? Honestly, that's up to you to decide. You can let us know what you think. But what makes this show feel so impactful at the end of the day is the ways in which it not only builds upon a more classical idea of alienated labor, like what we see in Marx, but then extends this logic to show how doing the type of immaterial labor that's become so dominant today really isn't all that different from being severed. While our jobs might not involve a detailed religious mythos, unless you're a priest or a rabbi, and that's a whole other thing we can get into, we might be tacitly participating in activities and rituals that make us feel like we're finding meaning, maybe even our true self at work. And in doing so, we might all be becoming a lot more innie than we are outie. Okay, guys, that's all for this one. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to check out our weekly movie podcast, Show Me the Meaning. It streams every Tuesday right here at 5 p.m. Pacific. In the meantime, I'll see y'all in a couple weeks for another one of these.